okay? The next thing that I start looking at is how you're going to backflow prevention. How are we going to keep from contaminating your well? Now, everyone likes to use these little check valves and little brass check valves and stuff like that. It is not water. It will not take anything to keep from preventing contamination of your water system. To do it right, and I fight with the landscapers about this all the time. It is code. This is a backflow preventer. This is a backflow preventer also. No way water can suck back in and contaminate your water system. Your potable water system is all each of us have. It's our lifeline. I don't know if any of you remember the drought, but you know what it's like to have a family come up in front of you and their well's dry and they're crying because they can't go any deeper, they don't have the money, they got to now put a tank in, they got to put another pump. It's heartbreaking. It's wrenching. When your water supply dries up, you know what the value of your property is now? Zero. Who wants a piece of property in a house with no water? I know some great real estate people, but that's a tough sell. Okay? Then I start figure out where we're going to take the water to. Everyone wants to pump it into a tank. All right, that's cool, but rest your well. If you've got to take and pump out 1,000 gallons into this tank, do it in hour increments. Let your well run for an hour, let it rest for an hour. Let it run for a little while, let it rest. Then you're not taking and drawing a bunch of sediment, a bunch of crap, throwing it into your tank, that sort of stuff. Take care of your well. Then it doesn't matter what I'm watering, I go to what it is. I start looking at the plants. I start there. I figure out which gizmo I want to use. There's a zillion widgets out there. You've all seen them, little flag emitters. These are cool. Netafim makes a bunch of stuff. Those are cool. But each one of these has a specific purpose with it. Most of you are not blessed upon having flat ground everywhere. You're on the side of a hill. You've got to watch little things like these flag emitters. You will get low line drainage. Doesn't have anything to hold the water. So if I'm sloped, my lateral line comes down. 100 feet of half-inch drip tubing holds a gallon of water. Now this one plant down here is getting an extra gallon of water. Well, it starts doing that every time you water. Pretty soon you're overwatering it. Now we're starting to have issues with the amount of oxygen that the plant gets. Okay? Then once I figure out that, now how many gallons per minute I'm going to be taking, or per hour I'm going to be using, and then I break that into gallons per minute. And then I start sizing my pipes. Now, one of the things that we run into at work all the time, these are all poly tubings. Now, let's see if I can do this. The difference between these guys is the wall thickness. Okay? We ask questions about this. Usually down your well, they have 200 psi poly. It's real thick, real hard to work with, not so much fun. Then generally sold in our area is 160 and 100 psi. Difference is the wall. So if I'm running a gravity set or I have something that's going to have a whole lot of pressure to it, you have the right pipe. Now, then it goes from there, it goes into drip tubing, 3/4, half-inch. Unfortunately, they make 6 different sizes plus the metric sizes of regular poly tubing, drip tubing. It's stuff that's real easy to poke a little barb fitting into. But unfortunately for us, everyone calls it the same thing, so we spend 10 minutes trying to figure out which pipe you have. They all have different fittings. Poly fittings have, that are higher pressure ratings, have barb fittings. Now they need to be heated in, okay? It's usually a more expensive setup. Now we get this all the time, and I'm not sure, but I've been outside several times. Everyone wants to use a hair dryer. Okay, I walked around a little bit. I did not see an electrical outlet to plug my hair dryer in. You have to use a torch. Heat the pipe up, get your fitting in while it's still warm, suck the clamp around it, get that sucked around there tight, no leaks. But poly fittings they're like $6 a whack when you start figuring in 3 clamps or 2 clamps or anything. So it's a more expensive system. The pipe is about the same as PVC, but more expensive. So drip tubing, cheap, but it has limitations. Your 1/2 inch, 6 different sizes plus the metric sizes. I can only go 240 linear feet with this. Then it doesn't start, nothing comes out the end, or it'll barely dribble out, stuff like that. Also, rule of thumb is it's a gallon per linear foot. So if I have 240 feet, I can run about 235 gallons per hour off of this. Okay? Now, 3/4 is the next size up. Let's say I've got a bunch of plants in a row. Ooh, my gallons is getting up there, or my linear footage is getting up there. I need to get to this pipe. These pipes have compression fittings or smart lock fittings that take, and you can shove in and twist the nut around, put on correctly, no leaks. But the reason you have to put them on correctly and use pressure regulators is so that you don't, all these emitters that I showed you they drip at a certain PSI. If I put a 1/2 gallon emitter on there and I'm running 60 PSI, I am not getting a 1/2 gallon a minute through that. With any garden, it doesn't matter what it is, you should know exactly how much water you're throwing down. Those of you that had to buy water from the man, like myself, we're getting a nice 6% increase over the next 4 years. Plus they want to build a dam. They're not getting a Christmas card from me. Okay? But I know exactly each area of my yard how much water I'm throwing down. It was easy to take and cut their 35%. What became harder was cutting 35% out of the inside of my home. Same thing, I'd switch all my shower heads, I'd switch my toilets, I regulated how long everyone was in the showers, all that sort of stuff. I cut 12%. Pretty tough to do. Besides, I believed all the scientists that we were in a drought before it actually got worse. I did all my stuff before 13, so I get the nasty grams. Oh, you're using too much water. Well, I started cutting everything way back before. So I felt penalized. So I would call them and say, until everyone catches up with me, I've gotten rid of all my lawn. I went to drought-tolerant plants. I love yard art. You can move it around. It requires no water. It's gluten-free. There's all these pluses to it. But I felt that they're going, oh, John, you need to cut more water, cut more water, cut more water. Well, there was no place to cut it. I'd already done what they wanted. So that made it sort of difficult. Didn't really like them that much. Still don't. The other thing I like to talk about are valves. You'll recognize there's a couple of these inline valves. I prefer the ones with the jar top instead of the screws. If you've ever had a little piece of crap stuck in them and enjoy getting your screwdriver out there, taking it all apart, putting it all back together, and then figuring out you didn't get the piece of crap out of there and you get to enjoy doing it again, you'll really enjoy these. I always look for valves that have a flow control. When my system is set up and my drippers are streaming water out, it's not working right. It's supposed to drip. Small drips turn into big pockets of water. So they all should have a little flow control on them. Look for this. These are actually my favorite. When I was a landscaper and I would go out, people say, oh, John, I'm having problems with my valves. They're in the ground. I'd pop open this box that the mulfers had taken and filled up full of dirt and all that fun stuff. And I'm going to have to be on my hands and knees. I charged you more to fix them. If I could go sit on my 5-gallon bucket and these guys, which go above the ground, these anti-siphon valves, you were getting the killer bro deal. Cool thing about these, built-in backflow prevention. No way it can contaminate your water source. It'll bubble out of here before it ever gets back into your system. These have to be higher than what you're watering. If I'm watering up there on the hill and I got this guy down here on the ground, when he shuts off, every lick of water in that line is going to bubble out of the top of this. You're wasting water. Easy fix. You can put a check valve in here. That'll keep the water locked into it. but we see this a ton. Everyone wants to replace it. Oh, I got water bubbling out of here, it's broken. That's not what's broken. It's the way your system was designed. You're going uphill and these are low, okay? So keep that in mind when you're building an irrigation system. Let's talk about emitter tubing. Another one of the fun things out on the market. These are cool. If you've ever had to plug in several million emitters through the course of a few hours, you realize that you get this. Your hands hurt. And you get to enjoy it again the next day too, because your hands are still sore from doing that. So somebody out there was thinking, and they built in the emitters. Really cool. But they drip on pressure regulation. I choose, this is one brand that we sell at our store, and I have it for a reason. From 10 PSI to 40 PSI, it will drip the same. So you don't have to build your systems just where everything is super accurate, because it will drip the same. It has some limitations. Yes? This is every 12 inches. I'll get into the little one in just a minute. Sorry, it's my mom. This has limitations also. Each manufacturer, you're looking at about 300 to 340 linear feet that you can put on a single valve, okay? Some of the guys out there, I go to the National Irrigation Show every year. They love to see me coming because I tattoo them on their products. I ask them about water and cannabis. I'm shocked that all these big wigs, these big corporations, none of them had ever heard of a smart pot. I'm just looking at them going, okay. So I also talk to them every year about better ways to water smart pots and cannabis and everything else in the ground. And same thing again, no one wanted to have the conversation with me. Ask my wife. Get turned around, they snubbing on me, going, oh, here's that guy again growing pot, blah, blah, blah. But I kept going back and kept asking and kept asking. And the reason that I wanted is because when guys got into the bigger grows, we need their engineers to design the systems. So after 8 years, I've got this little, from Toro, from Netafim, from NDS, all of these guys, Rainbird will now finally help. If I have any big grows, I can call them and they will help me engineer big grows. They will help me engineer a small grow. They'll help me do your lawn, which has been cool. You know, all these years of fighting and taking crap from these guys, I won. I made some steps. So, yeah. So now we have its little brother, the 1/4 inch drip emitter. I usually use this on 100-gallon pots and smaller. 1/4 inch has its limitations. The manufacturer says that I can put out 19 linear feet of this. Well, they lied about the last 4 feet. Guaranteed. I've done it. It was all, the emitter stuff was built in. A lot of grasses, a lot of things you see, everyone's putting this underneath subsurface instead of spraying into the air. I use it on top, works really well, but you can only have, on a 1/2 inch drip line, I can only have 200 linear feet of this total on a valve, or it won't drip right. Okay, so know your limitations. And then usually when I design a system, I calc out everything. I calc the friction loss. I want to make sure that the first guy and the next pot that's 300 feet away, that every single guy gets the same amount of water. And I do that by taking my emitters, figuring out how much water each plant's going to get. Now that sizes my main line, because all pipe has its limitations. 1/2 inch pipe, you're limited to 5 gallons a minute through that. 3/4 inch pipe, it's 8 gallons a minute. 1 inch, it's 13, blah, 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 blah. The reason is, without getting too deep into it, is the velocity, speed, the friction loss, and the foot-pounds of it. And that's the conversation that takes a little bit more time, so I'm going to pass on that. But after I've figured out what I need for each of my beds, then I go down, I size my lateral, then I get into my valves. Each valve, always, if you are building a sprinkling system and it does not have a pressure regulator, you have not built a sprinkling system. This takes and makes all the widgets at the end work right. First thing I see when I go out to gardens, that's what I ask. Where's your pressure regulator? Oh, I bought them, but I didn't put them in because the water wasn't coming out fast enough. It's not supposed to. For some reason, the cannabis industry loves to speed water. Speed water is not where it's at. My belief is it is in cycle water. Instead of taking a plant and putting 400 million gallons of water on it at one time, just give it little doses of water. Give it to what it can drink. Anything that goes down past the top 70% of it is all wasted water anyhow. Any water down here below in where your big stabilization roots are, you wasted that water. It's no good to nothing for anything. Okay? Then I get down into filters. We've all seen, I got a zillion little filters here someplace. Here we go. Disc filters, these are really great for organic material, or if you don't want to change your filter all the time because it does not only on the outsides, it also does in between each of the discs. Still have to be maintained. You should maintain your filters more than everyone thinks. I put a filter on, I don't have to mess with it this year. Go through and clean it all the time, all the time. They make cool down, spin down filters. Put a little valve on them. These are really good for just sediment only. They will not take the organic material out. They'll just clog up around the outside. And then the least of my favorites is the combo. Filter, pressure regulator, all in one. Really cool idea. Fits nicely down into a valve box. All the landscape guys put them up like this, which is real cool because every time that the water goes off, where do you think all that sediment goes? Right back into the line. And it's a little tiny filter. It's the smallest filter known to man, and they're expensive. They're like 30 bucks a pop. So, not a big fan of those guys either. What else did I have in here that I wanted to talk to you about? Getting back to the wells. I always ask, you should always build your system, it should be balanced. If I'm going to put in a water storage tank and build a system, if my well does 10 gallons a minute, that's what my system should be that I'm building. I can't take and have 20 minutes. If I'm building a system that takes 30 gallons a minute, my well only produces 10. I got to run, every minute, I got to run 3 to take and replenish my system. Doesn't make any sense. General rule of thumb with any home, when they put in a house, the well pump, if there's enough water in the hole, it's a gallon per fixture. They count up the fixtures in the home. That's how they size it. If I have a 10 gallon a minute well, the well guys aren't putting a 10 gallon a minute pump in there. They're taking and they're putting a 7 or an 8 gallon. They don't like to tax the holes. Okay? The other question I ask, besides how many gallons per minute, is what kind of pressure are we running? They're pressure switches. Little gray or black box, has a little arm on the side. This is what regulates the pressure in your well setup. I have to know this. I have to know how many gallons per minute and at what PSI the system is going to be working at so that I can design the rest of it. I'm shocked, and I've heard it 12 times this week. How much water does your well produce and what is your pressure? The common answer that I get is a lot, and I have plenty. Now, I design with these cool little sheets that tell me the ins and outs of all the pipe and all the fittings. I've gone through them repeatedly, and a lot is not on here. It is useless information, okay? A little bit about PVC. Believe it or not, I get asked this more than you would think. It's much cheaper to use. Most of the growers, all their systems are built on top of the ground so the earth isn't there. So there's a lot of times where you use a couple of 45s instead of a 90 where things are going to bend, or maybe there's a lot of pressure before it hits your lateral system. You have to outsmart your fittings a little bit. We get this, 90s are universal. It's a left, it's a right. I can pull someone, I need a 1/2 inch 90, I pull it out of the bin. Oh, I need the bin going the other way. Okay, here you go. I fixed it. Yeah. You get that too, huh? Yeah. This is another one of our friends. Teflon tape. Plastic fittings, you don't need a bunch of wraps on it, but anytime that you're threading anything together, put a little Teflon tape on it so it doesn't dribble, it doesn't leak. Make it go with the threads. The landscaper that taught me believed that you never used pipe dope or thread compound in the garden, that it leaches and that your plants don't like it. Every home I've ever built, everything I've ever built in a water system, I use Teflon tape. It's your friend. The other friend that you have that most people don't use are unions. This allows you to take parts apart that are going to break. Your ball valves, things that screw into, you know they're going to break. Put a union in there, thread it in so that only place, if that ball valve breaks, that's all I'm throwing away. I'm going to unscrew everything else, or if I put it together and it leaks, oh look, check it out, I can fix it. These are cool, they have a little O-ring inside, they split apart, and now they come right apart. Now I can unscrew and take whatever apart. How many have an irrigation system at home that has their irrigation valves put in and not one of these are on it? Everybody, because I know how many I sell. I watch the landscapers come in, I go, okay, and they're quizzing them, hey, you got this, you got that, where's your unions? Oh, I don't need those. Okay, so you might as well tell the homeowner that next time he has a problem that you're going to cut and throw away a bunch of stuff he just paid for. That makes you feel good. What else do I have fun that's in here? Oh, showed you that. Hose bibs. Garden valves. A lot of people like to hook up their irrigation system coming right off of this. A little splitter Y on it. Now I still have the hose thread. Look how teeny that hole is. That's all the water you're getting out of there. What's that? 5 gallons a minute, ½ inch. Same thing on this guy. They're all the same. The hole in here is the same. So the other real cool part about this is they're loaded full of lead. How many people are still drinking out of their garden hoses? Raise their hands. Written all over it. Written all over it is not for human consumption out of the hose. Do not drink out of your hoses. Sort of funny that we won't drink out of our hoses, but we'll give our plants water. Yeah. I have no idea. It drives me nuts. I have asked that question for every hose manufacturer that walks in our store. Yeah, it's disheartening. This is what the federal government says, is that your shower valves and your hose bibs do not have to be lead-free. Everything else in your home has to be lead-free. They're brass, but brass has it's got lead in it. Yeah. They can have lead in them. Yeah. So you know me, I asked that question. Why? Why? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. You know, who doesn't stick their head and their mouth into the shower every day? I know I do. I got a little tiny bit of hair loss, but the rest of it I've been able to live with. I don't know what it is. I know it. That's it. I have to put it up high. Every hotel I've ever been in, I have the cleanest belly button when I leave, but the rest of me is dirty. Put this shower head at about 6 foot tall. They're not liking me. Yeah. I prefer that if I'm going to, I prefer actually to not come out of the hose bib. I prefer to take and tee off on the line that supplies it and go off of there. Now I get the full pipe. Now I get more gallons per minute. I have less friction loss. I'm not going through a leaded hose bib. And at home, believe it or not, I use watering cans. I go over the bib, I don't use the hose, I fill up my can, and I go out and give whatever isn't on my sprinkling system a little drink of water. Okay? Sure. Correct.
So if you're talking about a cannabis plant, it's usually less of a lateral, correct?
Correct.
Do I have to supplement with rainwater or what's going on?
Nope. That's where the coil method has really turned out. I really like it. I design a lot of systems where I coil around. It waters evenly. But the biggest thing, anyone that ever works for me, they know exactly how much water each plant is getting. So now you know your run time. You know how much water you're putting down. The landscapers are supposed to, now that the California Model Water Act is in, we actually have to have a sprinkling audit. So let's say that you just built a new home, you're going to take and landscape more than 500 feet. I have to go through, I have to look up in WUGOLS, it's WUCOLS number 3, that tells me the watering requirements. I have to fill out a form about what soil you're using, and then I have to design the irrigation system with certain PSI, certain gallonage, and turn that in, and then someone comes out and does an audit and says, oh, you are 70% or better, you pass. So you think the rules are getting bad for the cannabis growers? They're the same out there for everybody. The guy building a house, you build a house now, you got to have fire sprinklers. Well, if I have a well that is only 10 gallons a minute, I get to enjoy double pumping my water. I get to go from there to a tank, and just so I can meet the fire requirements. No, you can have your potable water and your fire tank all as one. If the system is designed so that your residential water comes off the residential fire riser, you can have it as one setup. Yeah. Sure.
The water meters that they're talking about,
I don't sell a lot of water meters because they're not, I haven't found one that's resettable. Basically what I do is I have designed out my system, and I'll tell you exactly how many gallons each plant is getting. It's about runtime then. You know exactly how much water you're throwing down. It's sort of funny that the growers all have a formula for their soil and a formula for their fertilization, but you ask them how much water they're putting down, and it's quiet. I don't know. Yeah. It's coming. Yeah, you know, the other thing when you plumb in water meters, most water meters have to be air released front and back, and you have to have a certain amount of pipe in front of them and behind them so that the air doesn't read through the meter. It gets a little complicated plumbing those in. But trust me, I'm looking. I want to have a cool meter that I can go over and reset so that everyone can actually count every single gallon so that they know. I mean, if the rules and regulations are coming that we have to do this, okay, cool, let's make the part. You know, that way everyone can do it right. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. Have a wonderful day.
I am Darlene Markey. I own Sweetland Garden Supply, or Mercantile now. We're changing our name. We're going through the county, which is why I know I need a separate tank for commercial for my water. And I'm ground level, and it was great. Heather, Stephen, and what was Jen? You guys were awesome. Thank you, because that gives us the overview. But I'm ground level. I talk to customers all day long. I help people get their soil amended. I help people prevent pathogens and insects, and then I sadly sometimes help people, most times, help people deal with the problems that are in their garden. So I do teach a lot of classes up at the store. I have a soil class this Thursday. My son has a drip irrigation class on Wednesday. And then you can look online at our website. I didn't bring my business cards, but the website still is sweetlandgs.com, and you'll see a series of classes. I like to teach classes about compost tea, and my favorite thing to talk about at dinner time is always microbes, which doesn't make other people happy, but it's what I like to talk about. So originally, when we started talking about growing green on the Yuba, I was actually involved in the meetings years ago, but in the spring it's very hard to get out. And so I have not been involved at all in the past year, for which I am sorry and so happy that they're continuing this. And thank you, Circle, and everybody else who is putting this together and doing this. I don't, it looks like I sponsor it by myself. I don't. Vermicrop actually helps sponsor this event. But they're also going through transition, so they didn't want their name on paper yet. But next year, they'll put their name on paper. But what I like to talk about is how do we create a healthy soil? How do we create a healthy ecosystem in our gardens so that we don't have all these problems? So we don't have runoff with pesticides. So we don't have to use so much water anymore. Okay? And so we don't have to keep buying nutrients. So one thing that happens in my store over and over, people come in with their soil tests and they say, what do I do? Almost on 95% of every soil test that I see, the phosphorus is off the chart. Okay? The nitrogen is down. Organic matter sometimes is way high, which is unusual for us, and sometimes it's way low. And the calcium is also very high. So I started thinking about that. Well, how do our plants use phosphorus? And how much phosphorus do we actually need? So if you talk to Amigo will say marijuana plants only use 19 to 22% phosphorus. And you guys have all seen those products, which I have one left in my store. I'm trying to get it out, but people want it, that are 0, 50, 30. The one I have in my store does not have EDTAs in it, by the way, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So our plants don't need as much as we're giving them. Less is often more, and people don't realize that. So I want to talk about some practices and some things that you could do. At the beginning, before you plant, I might have caught you before you start planting. And I need to tell you, I got 3.5 hours sleep last night, because at midnight, Nick asked me for a PowerPoint 2 days ago, and I said, why don't I know how to do that? And at midnight, I made one. But no, I sent it to you, but you know, I sent it to you at 1 in the morning, so I didn't expect it to be here. Oh, sure, you got it. Great. Wow. All right, soil, can you dig it? By me. Can you? Yeah, thank you, Frida. I can dig it. Okay, so the first thing that all of you could do to help protect our watershed in the Yuba, our watershed, the Yuba watershed and the greater watershed of the Yuba, is to get your soil tested or test it yourself. So I'm not supposed to name brand names, but there are really crappy test kits, and there are really pretty good test kits, and then there are professionally done test kits. So can you go to the next page? Okay, so test your soil. You can use a home kit. Those crappy ones, you can get a general idea what your NPK is. How many of you know what NPK is? Okay, does anyone want me to explain it? Okay, NPK, okay, first of all, your plants need micro and macronutrients, right? All plants need carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and all plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then a whole slew of micronutrients like boron, molybdenum, zinc, iron, sulfur, all of those things. Your plants get their carbon, their oxygen, and their hydrogen from the atmosphere, right? Everything else about your plants, everything else that your plant needs, it gets from the soil, which is below the ground. So that's why it's important to test your soil. Look at your soil. So the first thing you're going to test for is to see what your NPK is. And so your nitrogen is for growing, correct? You guys all know this, right? Phosphorus is for blooming. Also, you need phosphorus for, thanks, Dana. Okay, for your roots, okay? And potassium is for your plant health. Okay, that's. I'm really putting this, in a small pocket. There's a lot of other things that you need to consider. So if you can get one of those little cheap test kits that test your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, then when you start buying your fertilizers to amend your soil, you'll know, oh my gosh, I have way too much phosphorus, okay? I don't need to add any more. Now, being on the ground, being a retail person, I know that most of my customers come in and they buy new soil, but most of them take that new soil and then they start mixing it with their old soil, and then they start mixing in new amendments, and they're really just having a grand old time being like a witch doing a brew, and at the end of it, they don't really know what they have. So before you start doing that, test what you're going to use, okay? And see what you have in it. Another very important thing to test, of course, is your pH. Minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, and just plain old minerals in your soil, calcium, are chelated, are picked up and used by your plants at different pHs. Certain microbes like certain pHs. So, just like our human body is something like, 300 trillion microbes live in our human body, more than cells. That we have 3 pounds of our body weight are microbes. 80% of your gut is microbes, okay? In a plant's life, it's the same thing, okay? A plant has all kinds of microbes growing through it, and then all kinds of microbes in the soil. So, and all of those microbes like it at a different pH level. So the ones that kind of like acidic conditions are microbes like E. coli, which is living right now in your body. It's there, but your body is not acidic, so it's not flourishing, okay? It's the same in your soil. And then there are plants like sulfur, or there's some iron bacteria that loves it super acidic, okay? So it's a good idea to test the water and test your soil just to see what your baseline is and where you're starting at. There are ways to adjust your pH naturally. You don't have to buy the little things that get in your water and do all the runoff. So the first good practice then is to test your soil. Know what your NPK is and know what your pH is. I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes. I usually do this in like 2 hours. Okay, the second, and I put all these on here, and I can email any of you any of these. I didn't remember to bring business cards, so you'll have to give me your email afterwards. The second thing to do, and this is true most of the time, most people need to add some new compost to their soil. The reason that they want to add new compost to the soil, it's like, it's like going to a party with the same people that you've seen all the time for your whole life, and you're kind of bored with the same conversations over and over and over again. So if you get new compost, you're going to get a whole bunch of different new microbes that come to the party, and you might get some more biodiversity. It won't be a homogenized party anymore. It'll be more of a cultural event. So the general rule is 1 to 2 inches of compost on top of the soil. That doesn't mean you're going to leave it on top of the soil, but that's your general rule when you're trying to figure out what it is. Now, I talk about this a lot in almost all of my classes, that not all composts are created equal, as are worm castings. Yet finding a good compost is actually very difficult these days. Finding a good commercial compost. Most commercial compost is green waste, which we think is great because we're doing something. There's 2 different kinds of green waste, okay? There's the lawn clippings from Sacramento area that may or may not have been sprayed with Roundup or something. And then there's the pile at the landfill that you've brought your old dressers to with lead paint, that you've brought your pressure-treated wood to, okay? That's what's getting composted. That is what you're getting. So, and a lot of compost companies are really trying to do it right. Like, microbes are an incredible thing. Fungi can consume anything. They've done lots of studies where they've put fungi on, toxins, and they've consumed the toxins totally. Like Paul Stamets, you've probably heard of this study, did this great study. Let me back up. The U.S. government was taking some environmental cleanup companies. They asked people to come in and try to clean up these toxin spills. I think the toxin that was spilled was diesel. And so these companies came in and said, and did these little test piles. Paul Stamets cleaned up his pile completely. There was no residue left of the toxin with the fungi. And I bet you all know which fungi it was, right? No, it was psilocybin mushrooms. So the government didn't choose him. But the point of that is that, fungi are amazing. They're saprophytic, so they're decomposers. They're going to break down things, and they can break down toxins. So if you can find a compost that has been treated with compost tea, that has maybe been treated with other inoculants, so that it is completely and absolutely broken down, that's probably not the best you're going to get, but that's one of the best things. There are some great organic composters. There's now some composting going on at dairy farms where they're doing biodynamic composting. There is, I know I'm not supposed to say names, but Fulcrum Farm has a dynamite compost. You just can't get it. Your best compost is in your backyard, what you've created in your garden. But getting enough to grow cannabis might be a difficult thing for you. So finding a good compost. When you're looking for a good compost, make sure it's dark, rich, smells good, and stay away from mushroom compost. And everybody goes, mushroom compost, why not? Makes my plants grow and they're all happy. Well, I love microbes, and mushroom growers use salts to suppress all the other fungi. So when they do that, you end up with this beautiful thing that also has a whole bunch of some kind of manure in it that makes your plants grow happy and be super healthy. And sometime in mid-July, you come in my store and you say, I have wilt. And you have wilt because that fungi, wilt, is in everything. It's all over the place, all the time. But you have the salts that were in your soil effectively have killed off the microbes that would have killed off that wilt. They're treated with chemicals. Crap. Not the good kind of crap. The other crap. Not the good crap. Okay. So I always say if you're gonna buy mushroom compost because it's so cheap, compost it and wait a year or two before you use it. It's great in a couple of years, but it's not great right away. So the first thing you want to do, the second thing you want to do, you want to test your soil. And I didn't say test your water, but test your water as well for pH. And then you want to get a good compost going. And then the third thing you want to do is add amendments. But again, I'm going to say we have a tendency to use too much. And we have a tendency to use too much phosphorus because we want those flowers to be big and strong, right? But if you could get the right microbes into your soil, and if you can get a complex, biodiverse, healthy ecosystem into your soil so that, your plants are going to pick it all up. All of those microbes that are in your soil are going to go up into your plants, and they're going to help your plants fight off pathogens, all kinds. How many of you have had wilt? Yeah, wilt is fatal. Once you get it, 80% of the time, your plants die. You either lose a leaf or two, or the whole plant is healthy, and 3 days later, it's laying on the ground. And you're like, what do I do? How can I save it? And I say over and over, Dana, what do I say over and over? Right? And I also say wilt is fatal, okay? So be preventative and get into your soil the microbes that will help treat problems like wilt or broad mite. There's actually a bacteria that consumes broad mite. Get them into your soil. It's in a product called Foliar Pack, and I cannot say the name. It's Indica B something, but I can, if you email me, I'll send it to you. So get those things into your soil so that in case there is some kind of imbalance in your system, like you've overwatered, like you didn't listen to John over here and you have way too much water going in your garden, and you made the conditions perfect for wilt to survive, to flourish, then have those microorganisms in there that will consume the wilt. Okay, and another microorganism, or one microorganism that consumes wilt, one class of microorganisms is Trichoderma, which is a fungi, and there's several different kinds. And then the other one is actinomyces. Okay, so how many of you have looked underneath your oak trees outside and you get all excited because you see this white filament, right? And you go, I found some mycorrhizal fungi. It's probably not mycorrhizal fungi. It's probably streptomyces. So streptomyces is one of the hundreds of thousands of bacteria that are in our body that help our body create antibodies. And it does the same in your plants. So if you get it in your soil and your plants are picking it up, then your plants are going to be stronger and healthier. So that's why I'm always advocating getting good microbes in there. But that's not what we're supposed to be talking about. Oh yeah, I do. Add amendments that feed the microbiology. Add nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, add trace minerals and minerals that help break down organic matter. So if you go to the next page, I really don't want to go through this whole list. That is a list of a lot of the amendments that you will find at stores, okay? And I have a few favorites on here, okay? Like alfalfa meal, which is hard to find non-GMO anymore. But alfalfa meal feeds worms, right? And it feeds the good bacteria. Feather meal, crab meal, shrimp meal, those three things have chitosan in them. And chitosan is this, it's a compound, I guess it's a polysaccharide compound that helps deter insects. Okay, and it keeps, it's a fungal feeder, so it feeds like, underneath your soil, I'm all over the place, it's 3.5 hours sleep. But underneath your soil, there's all these different players, right? There's worms, there's arthropods, those are the bugs, right? And there's bacteria, there's fungi, and there's nematodes. And a lot of the nematodes are good, and some of them are not so good. But those good nematodes are actually fungal feeders. So they'll, and fungi feeds on them, and then they feed on fungi. It's really interesting because everybody feeds on each other. There's no waste in nature. So, but chitosan is chock full of things that feed fungi, and the fungi feed the nematodes, and then the nematodes go after larvae in your soil. So it's this little chain reaction. So if you start thinking of your plant and the soil underneath it as an ecosystem, instead of going, you know, oh my God, I have powdery mildew, I need to spray, spray, spray. You start saying, okay, what can I do to prevent it? At the beginning, then you're not going to have so many problems. Okay, so this list, I think I'll actually have it put up on my website so you can look at it. And a lot of my information comes from just the bags in the store. It also comes from Amigo Bob, who wrote a great little pamphlet called Know Your Soil. And he based his little pamphlet based on the tests, the soil tests that A&L does. Okay, so a lot of that information comes from him, from us, from me, from my employees, from my customers. But I don't want to go over everything there. I mean, just think, test your soil, test your water, know what you need before you start dumping 10 bags of Calphos and 3 bags of high phosphat guano in your soil, and you end up with, like, they come in and they say, okay, I want BioLive, I want DiCal, I want feather meal, and I say, well, that's 42 on the nitrogen, and that's 90 on the phosphorus, and that's 28 on the potassium. Let's talk about this. What do you really need? Okay, so if we figure out, I have all these notes, balance, complexity. Okay, if you figure out what you need in your soil, and then you don't have to over-add nutrients. If you buy the bag soil or bulk soil from someone, really check it out. I mean, go down there with a meter. Go down there with a pH meter or one of those little pH things and check it out, because we, of course, as a retail store person, we hear all the complaints. We hear, oh my God, that soil I got was 3.8 pH, and but be careful when you choose it. And make sure that your soil has good tilth. So whatever it is you're getting, make sure it has good tilth. And things that hold the water are silica. Silica holds water. Core fiber holds water. So then you don't have to water as much. Okay? All right. And then let's also start being preventative in your garden when you're thinking about your ecosystem. Think about getting some preventative, some beneficial bugs in there. And think about creating a diverse plant life in your garden. So if you have in your garden, if you have flowers that attract beneficial native bees, you're going to have less of a problem with aphids than your person next door who's been spraying neem and they've become resistant to it. Plant around your plants some of those plants like lavender, rosemary, basil, chamomile, German chamomile. It's a pain in my garden, but guess what? Powdery mildew doesn't grow where there's German chamomile. Yeah, so consider having a diverse garden and not just, a monocrop going, which I know is hard when you're in a greenhouse, but when you're outside, consider doing this. Consider adding inoculants. And there are all kinds of inoculants that I love, and if you ever want to talk about inoculants, you can call me. Bacillus subtilis is one of my favorite inoculants, and it is a bacteria. There's, I think, 300 or 400 different identified strains of Bacillus subtilis. There was one strain identified near Davis, and it was isolated and used to fight the powdery mildew issues in Northern California. But that company was then sold to Novozyme, who, guess what, sold it to Bayer, and now I have to decide if I'm going to keep it in my store. And it's my favorite product on the planet. I have conquered powdery mildew in my yard with this product. And it's a Bacillus subtilis product, but I don't know if I can find that strain anymore. So, but if you look at the inoculant bags, a lot of them have a diverse range. And I really think that's healthier than coming in and just buying the streptomyces or the trichoderma. So streptomyces, as I said earlier, is one product that people have gone in and used to help fight wilt. But it's an aggressive bacteria that grows in hyphae. It looks like a fungi, but it's actually a bacteria, and it's aggressive. So when it grows, when it wants to eat, it's going to go after the pathogens first, but when the pathogens run out, it's going to be like the Lake Davis and the Pike story. It's going to, consume the good guys, and then eventually your wilt's going to come back because there's no more food for the streptomyces. It's going to go away. So if you can think of it as an ecosystem and get these things into your soil, you might have an easier time. So look for inoculants and get them in there. Let's see. Beneficial bugs we talked about. There are bugs, broad mite, russet mite overwinter. How many of you guys know that? They do overwinter. So you can get, again, these companies are being bought out by our favorite companies. It's harder and harder to find things. You can get predator mites like Schwarzschild mite, Andersoni mite, and you can, right now what I'm doing is I'm opening the packages and sprinkling them because it's still too cold where I live, but you can get them and start hanging them up around your yard and get a population of these little mites. And then the next question I'm asked by everybody is, well, aren't my ladybugs going to eat them? Isn't this one going to eat that one? Yeah, it is. It's an ecosystem. That's what happens. But what you have to do is you have to have some of those organisms in your system, and when there's food for them, they'll flourish. So, and then there's, the simple beneficial bugs like praying mantises and ladybugs that are good to have. You probably already have them. But if you get all those flowers in, like I was talking about earlier, it'll attract your ladybugs. And then my other big thing, I don't know if it's that big, but try to know your ecosystem. Try to really think about what you've been putting in your garden, and do you have everything balanced? I mean, it's kind of like your body. If you're drinking too much beer, your body's probably acidic, so drink a little bit beer, eat a big salad, eat a piece of bread, drink a little more beer, but don't just drink beer because then your body's off. It's the same in your garden. So don't add too much nitrogen. Don't add too much of one thing. Look for balance. And in balance, you're going to have complexity. You're going to have diversity, okay? And in diversity, you're going to have nutrient cycling that takes place, nutrient retention. Did I tell you that microbes pick up the nutrients and feed them to your plant better than those? Okay, I didn't. I started to. So EDTAs is a synthetic amino acid. It's in mayonnaise, okay? EDTA, I pumped in my body to get the lead out of my body. I do have lead-free hoses. We all do now, right? But not the valves, just the hoses. And so plants can utilize nutrients, chelate nutrients through EDTAs, through humic acid, which is a great thing to get into your soil, and through microbes. And also, your plants can pick up stuff through osmosis as well, which means when the water's, there's water in the ground and your roots come down, if it's salty, especially like ammonium nitrate or urea, your plants can pick that up. But ideally, that's not the best way to have your plants pick up nutrients because then they're not as healthy. The best way for your plants to pick up nutrients, in my humble opinion, is to encourage your plants to create symbiotic relationships with the microbial life in the soil. So how many of you use mycorrhizal fungi? How many of you use that? Okay. So mycorrhizal fungi is awesome. You all know you use it at the beginning and it makes your roots grow. But did you know it's what feeds the plant's phosphorus later on? It's what converts the phosphorus into something usable for the plant. So it's actually a good idea to inoculate your soil again in August with phosphorus instead of pumping in 4 more bags of 0-12-0 Backflow. Use what's in the soil. Use it. If you don't use it, when we have runoff, where's that phosphorus going? It's going into our creeks and our rivers. Have you seen the algae blooms? Okay, this is what's happening up in Humboldt County, is that they've used the beastie blooms of the planet over and over and over again. So, Rachel, how much time do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, great. So balance and diversity in your garden means nutrient cycling. It means water. It means nutrient retention. Your plant is smart. Can you go to the next page? Your plant is smart. It only picks up what it wants and what it needs at the time. Your plant sends off sugars and little proteins to the microbes, and the microbe does their job, makes whatever nutrient your plant needs available to the plant. So a balanced ecosystem in your garden helps your plants, your soil hold water. It suppresses diseases. It helps degrade pollutants. So knowing all that, just some quick guiding principles. Plants are smart. Think of plants as smart, just like water is smart. Water goes downhill. Plants are smart. If they want something, they ask for it. And they pick it up through their relationship with microbes. Healthy ecosystems within the soil create healthy plants. And Dana's right. I've probably told her 100 times, feed your soil, not your plants. pH determines which minerals can be chelated by a plant, and pH can be adjusted naturally. So if your pH is too high, you can, oh my God, my brain is going crazy. I always do it backwards. If your pH is too high, you put cottonseed meal to lower it, and sulfur, but I like cottonseed meal better, if you can find organic cottonseed meal. If your pH is too low, if it's too acidic, then you could add things like oyster shell or dolomite lime to raise it. The easiest product to overuse is phosphorus. Nitrogen, as you probably know, leaches out of your soil first Your plants use it quicker. It's more water soluble. Your plants actually use it. And phosphorus stays in the soil until it can be used by the plants. And our tendency to overuse the phosphorus can damage our watershed. So, create good practices to avoid problems and pathogens in your garden. Wow, I did that in 35 minutes. Questions? Dana? Right. So one of the, if you've had wilt, how many of you have had wilt? How many of you are dealing with the situation where you can't use the same soil that you had last year? Is that what you're dealing with? Okay, good. So the thing to do, Dana, is to get a biodiverse group of microbes. So get some of that microbe, but you can use that microbe, but if you're using only that microbe as your inoculant, yeah, it's going to wipe it out. And what she's talking about is there was a product called Actinovate. Actinovate was one of those other ones sold to Novozyme, and then Novozyme sold the research rights to Monsanto. So I dropped Actinovate. The guy who created Actinovate created another streptomyces product, and it's called Forge. And Monsanto is in the process of suing him for this. But almost any streptomyces is going to help build your plant's immune system. Okay, so get a little bit in. Moderation. Sebastian. To raise your pH, you want oyster. By the way, how many of you know that being a lead toxicity girl, oyster actually has lead in it because we find it in the bays where we used to have leaded gas in our boats. So I've stopped using oyster in my garden. Dolomite and hydrated lime, any kind of lime. Sonia. Can you stick your hand in your soil and can your hand easily go down? If you have oxygen, then you might be able to get away with that. So there's always this discussion about to till or not to till. So not to till, you still till a little bit when you say I'm not tilling. You're still tilling like 4 inches, no matter what you say. But if you don't till, you end up with a more fungal soil. And that's because you're not disrupting the lives of the worms or the arthropods in the soil. And when arthropods die, they tend to make your soil more fungal. So, yeah, you can do that. Okay, I want detailed notes. Yes, sir. Frank. Yes. Okay, so OMRI is OMRI certification, okay? So the way you can, and this is good if you're planning on getting a license, if you want to become a certified organic grower, then you have to buy either single ingredient products like feather meal, which are either OMRI or CDFA, okay? Actually, a lot of the mixes that they have out there, I mean, if you want to make your life easy, go get a mix, except for you don't know what's in your soil and after you test your soil. But a lot of the mixed products nowadays are OMRI certified. So, but yes, they're pretty reliable. The only thing that's not so reliable is compost is OMRI often, and it comes from green waste, right? You can have alfalfa pellets be CDFA, but you don't know if they're GMO or not. Okay, so yeah, in some areas that's suspect. I did not. Okay. So cover cropping is another great way to do a no-till or a minor till. So if you cover crop, you're going to use things like beans, fava beans, bell beans. Fava beans put out a lot of nitrogen. There's certain clovers that put out a lot of nitrogen. And then you cover your crop, your garden in the winter. And then, the verdict's still out about which is the best way. Most people go cut it down and till it right back into their soil if they're tilling. Some people pull it, throw it in the compost pile. So, but when you cover crop, what you're doing in the winter is you're feeding the worms, you're providing homes for the arthropods, and you're giving your soil some nitrogen. And you're also giving your soil some rhizobacteria, which often rhizobacteria, one of my favorite little kinds, they're the bacteria that take the oxygen out of the atmosphere, bring it back into the soil, and give it to your plant in a usable form. So, yeah, cover crop. What else? Yes? So, I am actually a fan of foliar feeding compost tea. So, Elaine Ingham talked at the Soil Food Conference the last 2 years. You guys know who she is? So, Elaine Ingham teaches classes about how to make compost tea and what are the benefits of compost tea. So compost tea is not a nutrient tea. It's made out of compost and good bacteria, good fungi. And then you feed a liquid solution, products that will feed the bacteria and fungi. Compost tea, when it's chock full of bacteria creates its own slime, its own glue. So if you can foliar spray your compost tea, and especially if your compost tea has chitosan in it, which is frass, crab meal, something like that, or shrimp meal, then you're not going to have as many pathogens. That glue is going to block out, like if powdery mildew is floating by and it tries to land there, there's no place for it to be. So it's going to keep going. It's not, or it's going to die. It's not going to survive on that leaf surface. If little broad mites come over and there's a bunch of frass on your leaf surface, they're going to say, ew, I don't like that. But it's also a great way, foliar spraying is a great way to get minerals into your plant quickly. Like if you have a sick plant, you want to do a quick foliar spray of minerals, one of those things that have zinc and iron in it to green it up. Because it's a lot quicker than feeding all that zinc and iron into the soil. So yes, compost tea or when you have a problem. Questions more? We got 2 more minutes. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Rock Foss is an interesting thing because all of our lovely old timers that you hear talk, Amigo, Roger, Robin, 40 years ago, our soil was sorely lacking. Our native soils, which is what they used here, what they had to use here. There weren't all these commercially available soils. They were lacking calcium and phosphorus. So rock phos, calphos, became the common way to get that into your soil. But it's slowly, people are getting away from it, okay? If you're mixing your native soils, you can put it in there. But as he said, some of the mined phosphorus has some radiation in it. And the mines, by the way, were totally flooded 2 years ago in Florida, so we couldn't get it. I don't know if you remember that. It was hard to get. So you can start pulling away from rock phos. You can find other sources of calcium. You can get more microbes in your soil. Yes? No. What is a worm tower? I'm going to come look at your garden. Can you do that in a few bits so I can watch it? So if I come over first, I have a lot of customers that just buy worms. They come every March and April. They buy worms, and in every single hole, They throw a pile of worms in before they plant. They love alfalfa pellets. They love, but worms are generalists. They'll eat bugs. They'll eat anything. You know, they like food. So I prefer to keep my worms in my compost pile and put them in as I need them.
Obviously, probably, well, I feed my chickens a lot of stuff. Never mind.
Okay, so I have, we need to go because we have someone else coming up, but over by Hezekiah, there's a flyer that has some classes that we have at Sweetland if you're interested, or you can find me at 292-9000. My name is Darlene. Peace.
Thank you so much, Dar. So next we're actually taking a little break. So you have until 3:45 for a break. But please stay for our last presentation because we have a couple of folks from Humboldt who are here to talk about being early adopters and how they were able to get permitted and move forward with their farm.